Hi there, everyone. Welcome to Saturday, February 8th, 2025. And you're here with Robin at In the Way Coaching. And we're here to read the Bible for the day. As you can see, I have my co-host Scooby Doo with me today. We'll see how long he participates in our reading for this morning. We are reading through the entire Bible in 1 year, and we are using the Day by Day Kids Bible, written by Karen Henley. This is a great version of the Bible if you are just joining me. It is written in chronological storybook form. So it tells us everything that happened in storybook form with a big overview of the story from Genesis to Revelation. And it tells us in chronological order. So it tells us what is happening in time order. It doesn't skip around. We call that consolidating a bit. So let's get out our calendar for the day. If you have your calendar and are following along, I have mine here. I have put my sticker on for the day since I have read our entry for today. And I hope everybody is still enjoying their calendars. And I hope, Jeannie, that you've gotten your calendar by now, too. We are going to be reading through multiple books again today. We have some consolidation. We are reading through some rules that God set out for us. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about is that the rules can seem like they are a lot in some cases. And we have to remember that we are going from a part of history where there were essentially no written rules. We have what we call codes in our society today mostly, and that's what we call our laws. So every year new laws are written. There's actually way more that are written in the Bible. We have laws about traffic, we have laws about everything. You can't do this, you have to do that. uh, we have business laws. We see he didn't last that long. We have rules for every single thing, and it is it's not uncommon to have a lot of rules. So these are rules that God was setting up so that his people would be healthy. So we have rules about food. We have rules about how they were to behave and rules about punishment for crimes that were committed. So I don't want us to be overburdened or not understand why we have these rules. That is why God is giving them to us. And these are what we call part of the Old Testament or the law. These were called the law. And so these were the basis for the law that was to be enforced. And these were to set God's people apart from the other nations. Other nations didn't have rules like these. And we will read today about even rules that God made about the types of foods that were permitted to be eaten. And it can seem kind of strange to us to think about some foods that should not be eaten. And we have rules like don't eat a lot of candy. I don't want you to eat that. It's not healthy for you. And before we had a lot of that type of information, God gave us rules a long time ago about the foods that we were not to eat. And there's even a rule in there about not eating fat. And I found that to be very interesting because I've never actually noticed that. Or if I had, I hadn't taken special note of it. In the past couple of years, I went through and took my health coach certification courses. So now I'm an official health coach. And I had always been health conscious. But even then, I really didn't give much thought to the foods that God told the people not to eat in the Old Testament. And so I started to do a little bit of research on that this morning after I read it, because some of what we do a little bit differently from the New Testament. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on after we read. But there are things that we don't do anymore. We don't tend to follow the rules about foods not to eat. That was typically considered a Jewish thing to do. And so now we would be considered Gentiles because we are not raised in the Jewish faith. And that still qualifies for us today. So these rules are meant to give us, we're meant to give the people guidance. And so we don't necessarily follow all of these same rules. And that doesn't mean that the Bible is not as true or is not as applicable. And there are people today who do still follow the rules about what not to eat and like that. So let's go ahead and start reading, and then we will talk a little bit more specifically about some of these rules after we have our reading today. And I almost forgot to mention, thank you for being here with me today, whether you are watching from YouTube or from TikTok, listening from Spotify, whether you are on Amazon Music, whether you are listening from your favorite podcast, wherever you are, thank you so much for being here with me today. And I'm really glad to have you here. I'm very glad that God has led you here. I'm so thankful. I was very excited yesterday. I do want to share with you the growth that God is having. I had actually some views on Amazon Music, and I was so excited about that. That doesn't mean that people will necessarily come back, but it means that somebody found this event there. And it's up to God to grow the seeds. So I'm not worried about that, but I'm excited. And shout out to all my people at work, because most of, I have to say, several of you are here, if not most of you, are because I've talked with you at work. And I would have never thought that God would use me so much at work, especially since I love to say that I was very frustrated about having to be at my regular job instead of being, quote, at my purpose. And God said, your purpose is exactly where you are. And I want to glorify him again for that, that I'm just always so amazed about how, about God's provision, about how I really am just right where I'm supposed to be. God's assurance. There we go, his assurance that I really am right where I am supposed to be. And I want to share that specifically, not just to glorify him, but yes, to glorify him, but to encourage you that you too are right where God has you to be. And that I would encourage you to ask God to show you, God, what is it you're going to put in my path today? Who are you going to bring me to talk to today? What is it you want me to do today? Because every day he sets up for us, I think of it like a little to-do list. And we don't know what that little honey-do list looks like, but God does. And I'm always excited to see the tasks that he has given me unfold. And sometimes I can become grumpy with the task that I am doing. And then I am reminded that I am doing the task that God gave me to do. And so he will send me people within that task. And each task I do, I am to do for him, as though I am doing it for him. And so I just want to offer that bit of encouragement in our day today. I know it's probably evening for everybody when they get the time to listen. But for me, this is the beginning of my day. And so I am reminded of these things early in my day and how to apply them. So today's reading comes to us from, I will list them as we get to them in the section of the chapter there. Our first section is entitled Other Rules, and it comes to us from Exodus 21 through 23, Leviticus 19, 24, Numbers 35, Deuteronomy 5, Deuteronomy 15 through 16, chapter 19, 24 through 25. Choose judges for each city. They should be fair when they judge people. Do what the judges say. Treat them as important people. Don't pay someone to be unfair. Don't pay someone to lie. Don't pay someone to do wrong. Be fair to people from other lands. Be fair to children who have no fathers. Be kind to women who have no husbands. Don't lie. Don't copy others who are doing wrong. Fathers won't pay for what their children do wrong, and children won't pay for what their fathers do wrong. Each person must pay for what he did wrong himself. He must pay with his life. What if a person kills someone? If he planned to do it, he should die. But what if he did not plan to do it? Somebody may want to kill him for what he did, so he should go to a special city, and there he will be safe until the people decide if he did wrong. What if somebody kidnaps someone else? he should die. What if somebody hurts someone else? Then what he did should be done to him. A broken bone for a broken bone, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Don't steal. A robber must pay back whatever he takes. Let's say he steals an ox or a sheep. What if he kills it or sells it? Then he has to pay back 5 oxen for the ox. He has to pay back 4 sheep for the sheep. What if he still has the ox or the sheep? Then he pays back 2 oxen for the ox, and he pays back 2 sheep for the sheep. Let's say someone digs a pit, which is a deep hole, and doesn't cover it. What if an ox or a donkey falls into it? Then he has to pay for the animal that died. Let's say someone starts a fire. It may get out of control and burn somebody's wheat. What if it burns the whole field? Then the person who started it pays for what he burned. What if somebody lets his animal eat from another person's field? He has to pay for what they ate. He has to give the best crops from his field. Do right for the people who work for you. They may be poor. They may be people from other lands. That doesn't matter. Pay them every day before the sun goes down. They need what you pay them. Let's say someone borrows something from you. Then don't make him pay back more than he borrows. Let's say one of God's people is poor. He lives in your town. Then freely give him whatever he needs. Don't let your heart get hard against him. Give enough. Then God will give you good things. So open your hands to give to the poor. Don't steal. Don't lie. Don't trick others into believing something that's not true. Rules about sickness and food. These come from Leviticus 11 and 13 and from Deuteronomy chapter 14. A person might get a sickness that others could catch. Then that person should live by himself. He should call out, "Not clean, not clean." But if he gets well, he should go see the priest, and the priest will look at him. The priest will say if he is well or not. Here are some animals that you may eat. You may eat ox, sheep, goat, deer, and gazelle. You may eat the antelope, but don't eat camels or rock badgers or rabbits or pigs. You may eat sea animals that have fins and scales. But if they don't have fins and scales, don't eat them. Don't eat eagles or vultures or ravens, owls or gulls. Don't eat hawks, ospreys, storks, herons, or bats. Don't eat any insects unless they hop on the ground. They must have bending legs for hopping. So you may eat locusts, crickets, and grasshoppers. Don't eat weasels, rats, or lizards. Don't eat anything you find that's already dead. Don't eat any kind of blood. Blood is very important and special. The life of any being is in its blood. Don't eat the fat of cows, sheep, or goats. And that's the end of our reading today. So I wanted to give us a little bit of explanation as to some of the things that we read about today. Let me go back to the beginning where we talk about judges. And so we have a society that prior to this, they didn't really have a lot of these things. This was a long time ago. And it used to be that you could, and it's actually, it still happens today, of course, that if somebody does something wrong, they would pay somebody to say that they didn't do something wrong. We call that bribery. And so God is being very clear that these things are wrong, and they're wrong in his sight and they're wrong in general. So we're not to pay people to lie and say that what they saw or what they didn't see. And we're not to pay people to be unfair. That's what God is saying. It talks about being fair to people from other lands. And so we can face those things even now in today's society. So that's our own application for today as well, is that there is a lot of what we would call discrimination against people from certain countries. And it hurts my heart when I hear about particular things of discriminating against people or trying to keep people out, because God says to remember that they were once foreigners in a foreign land and that they were treated badly. And we want to remember how the Jews were treated badly by the Egyptians. And we want to make sure that we don't repeat the same sins that the Egyptians did to the Jewish people, to treat them unfairly. And so God is telling them, be fair to people from other lands. And we want to make sure that we are also fair to people. Just because they come from another country doesn't mean that we should be unfair to them. Talks about being kind to women who have no husbands. We would call those widows, because they don't have the same provision financially. They rely upon God to take care of them, and so we should be kind to them. It says, don't lie and don't copy others who are doing wrong. So that's a really good application. We can, even as adults, go along with people. If we hear somebody disagreeing with somebody and we may not have an opinion yet, we just go, oh, yeah, yeah, that's wrong, that's wrong. But really, it's, or that's right, that's right. And we don't necessarily know that. So if we find out that people are doing wrong, don't just go along with people. Don't copy people who are doing wrong. This one is really important that I wanted to point out. We have a section here where it says, what if somebody hurts someone else? And then what he did should be done to him. A broken bone for a broken bone, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And we would call that payback in today's terms. And we say, well, he did it to me, I'm going to do it to him. And we have an answer for that with Jesus. While that may have been the rule a very long time ago, when Jesus came, he specifically said, you have heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, you are not to do that. You don't repay evil for evil. I don't remember the exact quote there, so that's my paraphrasing. But what he says is, if someone hits you, to turn the other cheek. If someone slaps you, to turn the other cheek. And what that means is, if somebody does something wrong to you, don't pay them back. Elsewhere, we will read in the Old Testament where God says, getting back at people is his job. Only he knows the right amount to give justice. And so we have some rules for when people break rules and some punishments for those rules. But when somebody does a personal wrong to us, we are not to seek our own revenge and try to get back at them. Joseph was a really good example of that. We saw how he forgave his brothers for selling him into slavery because he understood that, in the future anyways, not at the time, he understood that, looking backwards in hindsight, that what they had done was done for evil, but God meant it for good. So even when somebody hurts us, we want to remember that God can and will use everything for good. And so we are not to pay back evil for evil. And I thought that was very important to bring up in today's reading. I thought it was very interesting, the parts about don't eat fat from the cows, the sheep, or the goats. And I did some reading into this. One, fat is in general not particularly healthy for us. So God was, in one way, keeping his people healthy. He was always he gave them rules about how to keep them from defiling, from making their bodies unclean. And another reason is that the fat from a lot of animals, from these animals, was given to him as part of the sacrifice. when they gave animals to God and they would burn it so that it was a pleasing smell to God. It sure smells good when that steak is cooking and that fat is on there, doesn't it? And so I did some extensive reading into that this morning about that, and it turns out that there was specific parts of fat that were not to be eaten, and and then other parts that were it was impossible not to have that in there, that those parts were not considered um, prohibited or forbidden. So I thought that was just very interesting. So also we have a tendency also to know about Paul and Peter in the New Testament for us grown-ups, where Peter was given a dream by God where he was shown all kinds of food, and he said, "Peter, eat." And Peter said, "No, Lord, I've never eaten anything unclean or impure." And God says, "Don't tell me don't call unclean what I have made clean." So I did some reading into that today too, because I knew about that as well. So I was trying to show that we have some rules in the Old Testament that no longer apply to us since we have Jesus who came in the New Testament. And then we also have Paul who says that, people were uh, arguing over eating food that was sacrificed to idols, because in most meat in the marketplace, what at different places had been sacrificed to pagan idols, non gods. So this was considered unclean. But there were people who were coming to believe that Jesus had died for their sins, that he was the Messiah who had come, and that that's the point of the New Testament. Testament is when you say what you have seen. So these were things that Paul and the other apostles had seen. And so as they were essentially converting people to Judaism, these people had never had these dietary restrictions. And he didn't want it to be a source of arguing. So he says, if someone wants to abide by these rules, then let them, and don't let it be a hindrance, though. It's not something that is supposed to be a problem. So we don't want to cause a stumbling block, is the way Paul puts it. So what it turns out that actually a large a large understanding of the unclean animals in Exodus is that it wasn't actually specifically alleviated. It wasn't that those animals are no longer considered unclean. For those who were raised in the Jewish faith, that and who were converting to not converting, but who were now believing that Jesus the Messiah had come, they were still going to be practicing these rules and to keep their body clean. It's just that now they also believed in the Messiah, so they were now would be considered what we would call today Messianic Jews. But for those who had never been Jewish and who never experienced these dietary restrictions, they are called Gentiles. And so those rules are not meant to be a stumbling block to say you can't believe in Jesus if you don't make sure you refrain from eating these foods. So we shouldn't be overly concerned about the rules that we read about the food. We were not raised with some of these rules because most of us nowadays are what we would call Christians, which would be what they would call Gentiles. And so these are rules for people who choose to follow them. But we should not be making other people feel guilty for not following them if they are not led to do so. So I wanted to make that point clear in our reading today. And let's see, I think that's about it. Those were the important things, was that Jesus had come to say, don't pay back people, turn the other cheek, and that the food was restrictions were not necessarily applicable to us today. So thank you for joining me today, and I appreciate you being here. And I'm glad that you're here with me, whether you have found me on YouTube or via my site. If wherever you are, and you are listening, if you have the ability to click love or like on the recording for the session, I would appreciate it if you do so, if you did enjoy today's reading. And if you have not already, then I would ask that you consider subscribing to my channel or following my channel, whatever the option is on the particular way that you are listening or hearing along with us today. I hope everybody has a great rest of their Saturday, what's left of it, whether it's your evening or whether it's still part of your day. And I will look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow for our daily Bible reading.